they were experts. These people had a great influence, and they were experts in a business that has very few experts, really.
With his rugged appearance and a presence brimming with inner strength, Clint Eastwood entered the American film industry as an icon worthy of admiration. From playing cowboys in the Wild West to becoming a gifted director who touched the coveted Oscar statuette, he has left an indelible mark over more than 60 years of Hollywood history. Yet at the age of 95, Eastwood unexpectedly revealed a shocking secret about the golden era of the movie capital. A list of gay actors who had engaged in discreet affairs, forced to live with a harsh degree of pretense. And among them was even someone hailed as the greatest icon of the century. Now, why did Clint Eastwood wait until he was 95 to choose to say it all? And what was so terrifying that it drove some to carry that secret to the grave, along with the loneliness and pain that lasted until their final breath? Known for his commanding roles, such as in the classic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood hardly needed lengthy lines of dialogue to command the screen. Yet in real life, few people knew that he was a private man, living independently and with strict principles. Perhaps because of his dislike for discussing personal matters, throughout his 6 decades in the arts, Eastwood became a silent witness to countless stories few have ever heard. He was close friends with many legendary gay actors, and on more than one occasion attended late-night parties in Beverly Hills, where he personally saw same-sex romances that could only be expressed in caution and secrecy, hidden from camera flashes and the sting of vicious gossip. At that time, coming out as gay was no different from ending your career, and Eastwood had witnessed more than a few people being kicked off set simply for holding hands. There were people who passed away in solitude, taking their secret to the grave, only because they loved in the wrong era, he shared in an interview. Now, free from any contractual obligations or pressures from film studios, Clint Eastwood, at the age of 95, has decided to speak out. Not to seek attention, but to expose what Hollywood had deliberately kept hidden for more than half a century. 1. Rock Hudson. The fear of being exposed and the shocking death that shook the nation. Beneath the glamorous image of the perfect gentleman admired by the public, Rock Hudson lived in constant fear. Fear of prying eyes, fear of sensational headlines in the press, and above all, fear that the truth about himself would be revealed in a harsh Hollywood where differences were rarely forgiven. Since the 1950s, Rock Hudson had been elevated to the ranks of the world's most successful stars, becoming a symbol of masculinity every girl dreamed of. But behind that dazzling spotlight was a double life. By day, he appeared stunning on the red carpet. By night, he returned to discreet relationships with men. When the notorious tabloid Confidential threatened to expose his true sexuality, Hudson was forced to choose a desperate solution, marrying his personal assistant, Phyllis Gates. However, this marriage was not rooted in love, but in deep fear. Hollywood insiders at the time all understood that this was merely a mask to maintain his image. Later, even after knowing Hudson was gay, Gates still agreed to play the role of his legal wife to protect his career. After the divorce, Hudson quietly entered a 3-year relationship with Lee Garlington, a stockbroker. Garlington often sneaked into Hudson's house after work, stayed overnight, and quietly left the next morning. The secrecy was so strict that Garlington was not allowed to call Hudson at home, nor write him handwritten letters, as he feared everything would be exposed. Many years later, Garlington tearfully recalled, "We lived like husband and wife, but the whole world didn't even know I existed." In 1984, when he was diagnosed with late-stage HIV/AIDS, a disease then considered a death sentence for the gay community, Rock Hudson did something he had feared his entire life. He publicly revealed the truth. The whole of America fell silent at that moment, because this act was tantamount to destroying his own image. Immediately, tabloids scrambled to dig up Hudson's past. Calculated marriages, rumors that had been suppressed, and hidden love affairs beneath the glamour of cinema. From Hollywood's red carpet to the front pages of major newspapers, the name Rock Hudson, once a symbol of masculine allure, now became the first face representing a disease stigmatized as belonging to society's outcasts. Hudson passed away in 1985 at the age of 59. President Ronald Reagan, his old friend, who had been criticized for his silence during the AIDS epidemic, finally spoke out publicly. Federal funding for AIDS research was significantly increased, and numerous community education programs were widely launched. If Rock Hudson had the courage to remove the mask in his final moments, then there was another male actor who chose the cruelest silence of all: self-destruction. 2. Carrie Grant, a silent love story lasting 12 years with Randolph Scott. Carrie Grant has always been regarded as the epitome of an incredibly elegant and almost unbelievable gentleman. He went through 5 marriages and had numerous romantic relationships with famous actresses. Yet behind the glamorous facade and the perfectly tailored tuxedos lay a forbidden secret that no one in Hollywood at the time dared to mention. For 12 years, Carrie Grant and Randolph Scott lived together under the same roof. The press called them roommates, while they themselves referred to their home as a bachelor's den. However, this special relationship opened the door to an endless chain of tragedies. In 1934, Grant married Virginia Cherrill. When Scott found out, he was so furious that he smashed the mirror in the bathroom and then spent hours sitting quietly in the reading room to calm himself down. A few months later, as a firm declaration of, "I will never let you go," Scott gifted Grant a multi-million-dollar mansion in Santa Monica. From that point on, Virginia Cherrill became the biggest victim. Although legally, his wife, she had to live with Scott, often breaking down in tears right at the dinner table and gradually realizing she was merely an outsider in Grant's life. Even though Grant claimed that the 3 of us lived in harmony, no woman could ever accept sharing her husband with another man. In the end, that marriage quickly fell apart. The turmoil inside Grant continued. Diane Cannon, another wife, once accused him of being excessively jealous, controlling, and sometimes even violent. It seemed that Grant's heart was still trapped in memories of Scott. After every argument, he would drive for hours to see his former lover. Cannon recalled with pain There were nights when he just sat silently in the dark for hours without saying a word. I asked him, but he only gently shook his head. Quote, though Grant later had many relationships with women, the shadow of Scott clung tightly to him, causing all those romances to end in heartbreak. The pain was even greater because, at that time, Hollywood absolutely did not accept same-sex relationships. Film studios, especially Paramount, worked hard to build Grant's image as a masculine gentleman and pressured him to marry, solely to suppress any rumors related to Scott. Out of fear of being exposed and pursued, Grant and Okotandia, though living together, had to keep their distance. They dared not touch, could not be public, and were always under Paramount's watchful eye. Grant once admitted that Scott was the person he loved the most, but that love was shrouded in tension and extreme fear that even the smallest rumor could destroy his entire career. While Scott confessed to friends about their relationship, Grant chose denial to protect him. On the red carpet, Grant would merely brush past Scott as a close friend and always tried to avoid having the press capture them in the same frame. It was not until the 1970s, when both were old and frail, that a Beverly Hills restaurant manager shared a touching story. He once saw Grant and Scott quietly holding hands in a dark corner after all the guests had left. At that moment, they no longer had to play any roles. For more than 10 years, Carrie Grant and Randolph Scott wore the mask of housemates just to stay together. But if they could still quietly hold on to each other, then another man would never have such a gentle ending. 3. Tyrone Power, the dual life of a Hollywood icon. From the 1930s to the 1950s, Tyrone Power was regarded as one of Hollywood's most dazzling masculine icons. Yet behind the captivating smile and flawless silver screen image lay a life full of inner turmoil, where he was forced to play the leading role in a tragedy he never wished for. In his lifetime, he went through 3 marriages, with Annabella, Linda Christian, and Debbie Ann Menardos. However, all of these were merely carefully crafted facades orchestrated by the studio to cover up an unspeakable truth. Tyrone Power was a homosexual. When Confidential, the notorious tabloid magazine, began stirring up suspicions about Power's sexuality, the executives at 20th Century Fox immediately fell into a panic. To quell the scandal, director Darryl Zanuck pressured Power to marry Annabella right away, a woman he had met only a couple of times. Just weeks after the wedding, Power was sent to England to film, as a way to cut off all connections with his lovers in America. Nevertheless, that scenario could not erase the loneliness. According to biographer William Mann, to avoid gossip, Power often asked trusted friends to introduce him to young working-class men who were unrelated to the entertainment world and who would disappear right after each night they spent together. Still, not all of his relationships were fleeting. One of the most profound and haunting romances in Power's life was with Cesar Romero. Romero once confessed that Power was the only man I ever loved. Yet that relationship eventually broke apart, likely due to internal conflicts combined with enormous pressure from society and the film industry. while Romero chose to live authentically despite facing prejudice. Power was trapped in the gilded cage of fame, forced to continue playing the role of the perfect man through sham marriages. After parting ways with Romero, Power had a romantic relationship with a sound technician at Fox. When he died at age 44 from a heart attack, this lover was not even allowed near his coffin. His presence in Power's life was completely erased, as if he had never existed. But the story does not end there. Another actor also had to resort to extreme measures to kill his true self. For Montgomery Clift, the fallen angel, and Hollywood's longest suicide. Montgomery Clift was a rare case in post-war Hollywood, completely different from the usual tough and rugged leading men. Amid countless strong and sturdy faces, Clift appeared like a fragile, gentle angel, yet one haunted by inner torment. His deeply sunken eyes, filled with sorrow, portrayed a fresh, new archetype, alluring, intensely artistic, and profoundly introspective. However, it was precisely this beauty that became an invisible blade, gnawing away at him from deep within. When asked about his private life, Clift would only offer a mysterious smile and a brief reply, "I love women." Yet in reality, he was never seen with any woman by his side. For over 20 years, the public never once suspected otherwise, because Montgomery Clift's talent alone was enough to capture everyone's attention. To hide his true self, Clift lived like a shadow, constantly self-censoring. He was so strict with himself that he would demand entire scenes be reshot just because he accidentally called a boy dear. He knew well that anything outside the mold of real manliness, even a gesture with a feminine undertone, could ruin his career. Hollywood at that time would never forgive, especially if it concerned his sexuality. Clift had loved deeply, but none of his romances were allowed to be public, except for a special friendship with the legendary actress Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth understood him better than anyone, and stood by him knowing he was gay. She once said, "Monty is the man I have loved most deeply, in a way no one can understand." In 1956, when Clift was involved in a terrible car accident that left his face permanently disfigured, Elizabeth was the first to rush to his side. Despite the blood, shards of glass, and chaotic screams, she used her hands to remove broken teeth lodged in his throat. Elizabeth never abandoned Clift, even when he sank into depression, addiction, and short-lived relationships with men backstage. That accident thrust Clift into a downward spiral of alcohol and painkiller dependence. The long recovery time devastated him, creating an image the press dubbed Hollywood's longest suicide. He had to undergo numerous reconstructive surgeries and faced accusations of substance abuse. According to Vanity Fair magazine, Clift withdrew from the screen for extended periods, choosing to live in New York to escape Hollywood and the pressures of fame. In the years that followed, Clift lived quietly, isolated himself, and erased every trace of femininity. He even wrote an article titled, "I Like Loneliness," serving as a mask to hide the emptiness and despair of not being able to live truthfully as himself. It was only after his death that close friends dared to admit Montgomery Clift was gay. In 1966, Clift breathed his last at the age of 45. On his tombstone, there was not a single line mentioning anyone he had loved. His life ended as a bitter tragedy, a gifted artistic soul forced to conceal his true nature beneath the harsh spotlight of Hollywood. But Clift was not the only star to live a double life. Beneath the dazzling stage lights, there was another figure also struggling alone in the shadows. 5. Merv Griffin, a lifetime. Living an escape from himself. Merv Griffin was known not only as a powerful mogul, but also as the man behind legendary television shows like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. In the public eye, he was the ideal model of a successful, wealthy, and extremely influential man. However, all of that was merely a facade for a person who spent nearly his entire life avoiding and hiding his true self. Griffin was once married to Julan Wright, but the marriage quickly ended. Afterwards, he was involved for more than 15 years with actress Eva Gabor. Those close to him were well aware that this relationship was entirely platonic. No sex, no love, simply a shield in front of the public to protect his reputation and to stop any rumors. Because Griffin understood well the harsh rules of the game in Hollywood, even the slightest slip could shatter an entire career. On the set of the Merv Griffin show, the crew quietly knew his true sexual orientation, but Griffin imposed a strict rule: absolutely no mention of my sexuality, whether jokingly or off the record. He controlled his personal image obsessively. In interviews, whenever questions touched on his private life, he coldly replied, "That's nobody's business." However, that mask could not be kept forever. In 1991, Danae Terrio, host of Dance Fever, filed a lawsuit against Griffin for harassment. Less than a year later, former assistant Brent Plotkin demanded alimony payments, indirectly hinting at an off-the-job relationship. Both issues were dismissed by the courts, but it was the first time that the American media dared to knock on the secret Griffin had hidden his whole life. He was gay. Biographers revealed that Merv once had romantic relationships with many A-list male stars, such as Rock Hudson, Marlon Brando, and James Dean. Some even called him Hollywood's secret love kingpin. But the greatest tragedy was how he treated those like himself. Journalist Michelangelo Signorile discovered that Griffin had hired and then fired openly gay employees within his company simply to avoid being associated with the gay community. When Griffin passed away in 2007, his funeral gathered many prestigious figures such as Nancy Reagan, Ellen DeGeneres, Barbara Walters. Yet strangely, not a single major newspaper mentioned the hidden side of his private life. Everything was so silent that the Hollywood Reporter published only a few lines. Merv Griffin died in the loneliness of being gay. A cruel and haunting ending to a life story deeply engraved in Hollywood history. 6. Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates, and the extreme measures taken to change gender. If you have ever been captivated by the tall, slender figure and the deeply piercing eyes of Norman Bates in the cinematic masterpiece Psycho, then you are looking at Anthony Perkins. Few would guess that behind this image lay a life filled with inner turmoil and contradictions. As a gay man, Perkins had to force himself to hide his true self from a very young age. He had many romantic relationships with men, the most notable being with Tab Hunter. The two lived together, spending peaceful evenings accompanied by piano music, riding vehicles around Beverly Hills, and were affectionately called the perfect couple by their friends. However, that perfect picture quickly shattered when a high-ranking manager at Paramount Studios summoned Perkins to his office and threatened that he must end the relationship or face the destruction of his career. Tab Hunter was heartbroken, and Perkins fell into a deep depression. The relentless pressure from both his family and the studio led him to seek help from a psychiatrist, undergoing electroshock therapy, as well as conversion treatments, brutal method commonly applied to homosexuals at that time. In 1973, Perkins married Barry Baronson, a photographer and actress. They had 2 sons together. Yet behind the veil of what seemed like a happy marriage, his heart was never truly at peace. According to many close friends, even after getting married, untold, Perkins maintained his relationships with men. It was believed that he often secretly met young men, mainly during business trips or at discreet clubs in New York and Los Angeles. Unable to live truthfully as himself, Perkins gradually became obsessed with the image of Norman Bates, the character who carried loneliness and psychological disorder within him. In 1992, he passed away due to complications from HIV/AIDS. His wife did not disclose his illness to the press at the time, and only after Perkins's death did the public learn that the legendary Norman Bates had passed away. The pain did not end there. 9 years later, on September 11th, 2001, Barry Baronson, the woman who quietly stood by Perkins's side for decades, also died aboard American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to crash into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And then another figure emerged, more powerful, wealthier, but who also knew how to hide even more skillfully. Hollywood, the machine that creates unreal dreams. Perhaps it was only when, nearing the threshold of a century of life, after hundreds of roles and reaching the pinnacle of fame, that Clint Eastwood found the courage to face the truth he had witnessed throughout his entire life, but had never once dared to speak aloud. In Clint Eastwood's era, Hollywood was not merely a film studio. It was also a production line of intricate illusions, where everything was carefully calculated, constructed, controlled, and concealed. In that world, masculinity was not just a quality, but a matter of survival. Stars like Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Anthony Perkins, and Montgomery Clift could only meet the people they loved at strictly private parties, events where every guest had to keep silent. These parties were usually held at the villas of producers, directors, or well-known gay actors within the industry, with security guards stationed at the gates. No reporters were allowed near, and no camera flashes were permitted inside. Within those walls, men who had played the lovers of famous actresses could freely hold hands, slow dance, and exchange kisses by candlelight, at least for a few fleeting hours. To avoid the prying eyes of the press and colleagues, they had to use vague terms when referring to their loved ones. A special friend, roommate, personal manager, or close assistant. familiar phrases used to hide the truth. On set, they addressed each other by pseudonyms. A mere touch of the hand, a fleeting glance, or a few hurried minutes chatting in the makeup room were all they could afford amid the harsh machinery of their world. Some couples chose to rent rooms in small hotels located far from the center, registering under fake names. They would arrive late at night and leave before dawn. Major studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and 20th Century Fox not only controlled actors' careers, but also interfered deeply in their personal love lives. When rumors surfaced, they were quick to fabricate fake romances to cover them up. Clint Eastwood understood this better than anyone else. He silently witnessed many colleagues, men he loved and respected, and sometimes suspected were hiding their true selves, being pushed out of Hollywood simply because they dared to live authentically. He had acted alongside them, dined with them, laughed with them, yet he had also turned his back, because if he hadn't, he would have been dragged down with them. Silence at that time was his shield. For once he spoke out, he would no longer be the Clint Eastwood the world knew. But now, at an age where no one can impose or control him anymore, Clint Eastwood has nothing left to fear. He speaks out, not to shock, but because he understands that the silence of his generation has become a burden weighing down today's youth. He tells of nameless loves, stars forced to live false lives, nights in shuttered apartments, where two men dared only to hold hands after the lights were out, and the outside world was blocked away. He recalls friends who were never called lovers, silent deaths, and photographs that will never be revealed. Clint Eastwood speaks not for himself, but for them. Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, and countless other legends. For all those who once longed to live truthfully, but could only star in a play that no one was allowed to watch. Perhaps this is also Clint Eastwood's final role, a survivor emerging from Hollywood's fog of lies, to speak on behalf of voices that have been buried. Lives beyond the spotlight. When the stage lights go dark and the makeup is wiped away, what remains is not glory or the dazzling roles once played. What truly exists then are the people who have lived their entire lives in silence, carrying secrets that were never allowed to be spoken aloud. During Hollywood's golden era, from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century, being homosexual was not a death sentence, but it was never fully accepted by society either. For that reason, Carrie Grant was forced to call his lover his roommate. Montgomery Clift wrote the essay, "I Love Solitude," to hide the truth. Rock Hudson married his assistant to avoid a scandalous expose, and Merv Griffin, the creator of an entire television empire, passed away alone, never once publicly revealing his true self. They loved in the shadows. On screen, they smiled. But behind the scenes, tears fell. As actors fully devoted to every role they played, they never once had the chance to live honestly with their own hearts. The list of people who had same-sex relationships during that time is not merely juicy gossip for tabloid headlines. These were tragic lives reflecting a harsh society, where people were forced to deny their own identities just to survive. Hollywood, the place famous for creating dreams, became the place where hundreds had to live as mere shadows in their own lives. Today, we have entered a different era, where love no longer needs permission. Stories like that of Jim Neighbors, who lived quietly with his partner for 40 years and was finally able to marry legally, are no longer rare. Now, actors can confidently walk the red carpet alongside same-sex partners without fear of losing roles or being boycotted. Yet, this does not mean we are allowed to forget the past. On the contrary, we must remember, retell, and be grateful for those who endured, who loved quietly, and who sacrificed their true lives to pave the way for future generations. Without people like Rock Hudson, the first to openly speak about AIDS when the world still turned away, there would be no present day where conversations about sexuality have less judgment attached. So, whenever you read about Carrie Grant, Montgomery Clift, Sal Mineo, or anyone else among them, remember that they were not just stars. They were silent heroes in an invisible battle. It was a battle for the right to love, to live authentically, and to be oneself. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Because this is not just Hollywood's story. It is a story about freedom, courage, and the desire to be true to oneself.